Hi there. In the last lecture, we discussed how to link posts to categories. And in this lecture, we are going to discuss how to pull those categories through to the front end of the site. Now, in a previous lecture, I spoke about implementing a basic menu system. So in this lecture, I would like to actually go ahead and do that. So the first thing that I'd like to do is to improve our mockup a little bit and make it a little bit nicer. So the first thing that I'm going to do is to head back over to the getbootstrap.com site. I've actually already selected it here, but I've gone to the components section, and then I've gone to navbar, and then I want you to just select all of this code if you're following along. So that's everything from for this example here with the a large variety of different navbar options, and just select all of that. Lovely. Then what we're going to do is head back over into our code and open up our header.html file. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste all of this code in here. And now we can clean it up a bit. So the first thing that I want to do is I just want to delete the right hand navbar. So let's have a look and see where that is. That's this whole section here. So where it says navbar right, that entire UL or unordered list. So I'm going to remove that. I also want to remove the form, so the whole form inside of there, as well as the drop down li. And what you'll notice is all we have left now is our two links over here. So if we had to save this page and refresh, we can now exit getbootstrap.com and refresh our home page. You will notice that we now have these this navbar at the top of our page looking great. So let's just maybe clean this up a little bit. If we go here, we can delete this one for now because we're not going to use it. And within the brand section here, I just want to say my blog because this is my blog. Great stuff. So let's refresh this page again. And yes, now we can select various things. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to set our home URL. And what that is going to do is that is actually just going to take us to the base of our site. So if we refresh this, you can now see that, oopsie, if we click on my blog, it takes us to the base of our site, to the root of our site. Cool. Now what I want to do is add our categories as menu links. So the best way to do that, firstly, is to actually create a function that returns a list of all of our categories. So I'm actually going to do this in the models file because for me it kind of makes sense that we should create a function within here and then call this function in our view. So as we discussed at the beginning of our the series, and we spoke a little bit about static methods, I'm going to create a static method. So the static method is going to know nothing about the instance of the current category that's being related, and we can call that method straight on the category class. So if you remember, the way that we declare a static method is by saying static method as a special keyword, and then just make sure to indent this, and then underneath that we create a function. So I'm going to call the function, and it's going to be called list categories, and this is just going to list all of our categories. So because it is a static method, we're not going to pass any parameters into this, and all we're going to do is just return something. So I'm just going to say return, and then we can, because we already have the category here, we can say return category dot objects, so getting the list of all the objects and then just calling the all method on that, and that will return all of our categories to us. So if you go back to the views file, you remember the way that we get all the posts is a very similar way, So now we're basically just doing the same thing, but we are calling it in a static function. So now I can copy uh, this function here, and every time we have the category library in a file, we can now call list categories as well. So I'm just going to jump over to my views.html file, and I'm going to home um, inside of my home function, I'm just going to call that. So I'm going to say categories uh, categories is equal to, and then we can call our list categories function. The one thing that we do need to do though is actually call the category class first. And now you'll notice that we don't currently have the category class pulled into this file. So I want to do that. Category. And because it comes from the blog model as well, we can simply just say comma and then add it, as we have with our Django core paginator libraries. Super. So now we should have a list of all of our categories. So, I mean, in essence, this function may be a bit redundant because we could easily just go category.objects.all and that would do the same thing. But this is really just for an example. So, say if we wanted to edit this function somehow and we wanted to break it up into a separate method, well, if we want to break the functionality up to more than just a return statement, and we wanted to use it in multiple files, then this is a great place for us to put this list categories method. For the sake of our example, it may just be quicker to say .objects.all, but I'm going to leave it in here now, just so that I can continue with the example and show you that it does actually work. Cool. So now we have our list of categories returned. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add that to our list of returned variables, and I'm going to say categories and then colon and then the name of the variable. Great stuff. So now we have access to our categories uh, uh, or a list of categories when we load the home view. So that's great. So let's go back to our header.html now. And I'm going to create a loop in which we can access our categories. So what I want to do is I want to do that inside of our unordered list, and I'm going to put this in the form of a for loop. So the way that I'm going to do that, as we've done before with our for loops, is to say open curly braces and then open and then there's two sets of percentage signs, and then I'm going to say for category in categories. So now for every single category in our list of categories, do something with that. We'll create a category, and then I'm just going to end our for loop. So I'm just going to say end for. Great. And now we can just push out our category over here. And let's see what that does when we run it on the front end of our website. So if I refresh this, it's just returning category. Oh, there we go. We actually have to put it into our double sets of curly braces. And we can save that and run it again. And great, we are now returning news and weather. Now, the last thing that I would like to do before we move on to the next lecture is actually link the news and weather to, or add the anchor tags to this section. So the way that we would do that is by the similar way to how we linked our single post IDs. So I'm just going to copy this line of code here, go back into our header file, and then in place of the anchor tag here, and maybe what I can do is I can just create one that's outside of our for loop. And what this will do is this, if I take this out completely and I just go /, this one should create a link to our home page. So I'm just going to make it / the anchor reference, and then, or the href, sorry, and then it's just going to link to our home, and then after that it's just going to loop through all of our categories. And now what this URL method is going to do, as we've discussed in previous lectures, is it's just going to return the absolute URL of our site, and then it's going to call one of the URL functions. So I want to call this one category, and we haven't created this the URL with this name yet, but we are going to do that. And then I'm going to call our category.slug. And what you'll remember is that when we return something to this file from our views, it's returning the entire category object. And the reason that it is only giving us the category name there, if we search this, or if we have a look at this, is because in our models file we have defined what is returned when we call the entire object as just the title. So we could just as easily go into our header.html and say category.title. Now this may be a better way to do it for us. And then the last thing that I want to do is just create this category URL. So if we open up urls.py in our my blog application, URLs, and it's going to be very similar to the single.py, sorry, the single root. And the only real difference is going to be one, that the base root is going to be category. We're going to call this variable category, and then we are going to name this URL category as well. And then this name is the way that we can reference the URL that is called to our template, which we can see here. That is what's called when we call the category parameter in our URL function. So now let's run this code and see what happens. Great, we now have home, news, and weather. Now if I click on news, what you will notice is that our URL now changes to /category/news. If we click on weather, it says /category/weather. Awesome. So this really completes our basic menu system. In the next lecture, we will be discussing how to link these menu items to blog posts that actually are categorized by the category listed in the main menu and what's selected here in the URL.